and we ought to be able to keep our country safe and make sure that the people that are waiting in line to come into America the legal way are respected as well in this process.
That was House Majority Whip Steve Scalise earlier today following a GOP leadership meeting with President Trump at the White House about the recent chaos at the border and the possibility of a government shutdown with the whole package of whether or not there would be wall funding involved in that deal. So President Trump has made it clear in no uncertain terms he wants $5 billion for an expanded wall in order to keep that campaign promise to secure the border. He needs Democrats' help and votes to do so. He told the Washington Post, though, tonight that he is considering Plan B if that doesn't happen, saying this, quote, "There are other potential ways that I can do it. You saw what we did with the military and with the barbed wire and the fencing and various other things." While some are criticizing his decision to send troops to the border and the recent tear gassing of some migrants as they tried to force their way into the United States, his critics also seem to have a bit of selective memory on this issue, according to Brit Hume, our Fox News senior political analyst. Brit, good evening. Great to have you with us.
Martha.
So let's start with that first and then get to the issue of funding the border, because obviously there's been a ton of criticism of how the president's handled this situation, which really shouldn't have come as a surprise to anybody. He's been nothing but clear on his approach to the border.
Well, that's certainly correct, Martha. And of course, his near hysteria over this episode at the border over the weekend, where tear gas was used to repel these people who were trying to rush the border in some numbers, was really a remarkable example of what we find all the time with Mr. Trump. Things that are done under his administration are considered outrageous, and violations of human rights and violations of chemical weapons treaties in the eyes of one Hawaiian Democratic Senator Brian Schatz. Although he later took that down, but it turns out this has been going on for some time. And one specific incident, Martha, was, I guess, November 27th, 2013, when at that very same entrance point at San Ysidro on the Mexican border near San Diego, a group of migrants rushed the border, were repelled with tear gas and pepper balls in the same way that the group was over this weekend, and nobody ever said much of anything about it. I don't remember it even receiving any national attention. It turns out, according to a report in the Washington Times today, that the Obama administration regularly used tear gas to repel migrants attempting to cross the border. So, as we often find out with things that Mr. Trump does, are not so unusual or strange as people would have you believe.
Yeah, people are horrified by an equal action and the response to it under different presidents in different ways, it appears. Also, when you look back in history, Richard Nixon closed the border. Reagan also closed the border at one point to thwart the drug trade coming across. And, I don't remember back in those years the kind of outrage and humanitarian concern about the issue to just secure the border based on national security.
Martha, it is simply a fact. The president says this all the time, which is, if you don't have a border, an effective border, you don't have a country. And that's indisputably true. And his promise to halt the flow of illegal immigrants into this country is a perfectly reasonable thing to promise. Now, you get into a question of whether we should have a better immigration policy to handle things like this attempt by people to get asylum. We obviously need that.
Yeah.
But that's not. But he can't wish that into being. That is a responsibility of Congress, which has been struggling with this issue now for decades and has not been able to reach any kind of compromise. And the reason for that, of course, Martha, is there's not any trust on both sides. The Republicans all think the Democrats want the immigrants to come in because they want them as voters, and the Democrats think the Republicans don't want to let them in because they're racists. So
that's exactly
there you go.
right.
And in that atmosphere,
and I think the American people across the land would just like to have a solution, and these people are pawns in that entire situation. And people really would like, just an orderly process. That's all everybody's looking for, is an orderly process here. So that's my last question to you on the politics side of this. The president wants, $5 billion over several years for border security. He's already told Democrats he would give them 1.8 million DACA recipients who could stay. That deal ultimately got shot down. Any hope that he can accomplish anything on this front before the end of the term?
Well, there's a deal to be had in which you get border funding in exchange for dealing with the DACA issue. If that's the young immigrants who came here as children and never have lived anywhere else, I think most people think that it's reasonable to have them stay, but under current law, they're really not supposed to. So that's a deal that's there to be had. The question is, whether either party is willing to make it. And so far, that hasn't proved to be true. But the situation is worsening. And I think the case for Mr. Trump's border wall has improved. I mean, that situation you see in Tijuana with all those people stacked up there, causing all kinds of stress on the government down there, is real, as was what the incident that happened over the weekend in which the tear gas was used. So this caravan, which a lot of people said was a myth and was not really meaningful and posed no threat, pretty serious. So there may be a moment here where everybody kind of wises up, but having seen what I've seen over the last couple of years, I wouldn't bet on it.
All right, Chris, thank you as always. Great to have you with us tonight. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
So this is Sergeant Leandro Jackson, an elite Army Ranger who was known as Lando to his good friend. He was killed this week in Afghanistan. He was not alone. Others have also lost their lives in the past few days as the situation. Somber moment last night as soldiers received the casket of Sergeant Leandro Jasso, 25-year-old Army Ranger. He was on his third deployment to Afghanistan. He's from the state of Washington. He was killed in Afghanistan on Saturday. Officials believe that he was accidentally shot by an Afghan partner force. His death now followed by the loss of 3 more American soldiers killed today when a roadside bomb detonated in the eastern part of the country in a Taliban-claimed attack believed to be the deadliest strike in Afghanistan in 17 months. I'm joined for more on this by Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Republican from Illinois, who serves as Deputy House Whip. He's also an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran. Congressman, thank you for being here tonight. Good to have you with us. I mean, obviously, it breaks your heart when you see the picture of this young man loved by his friends, the life of the party, according to these reports, and extraordinarily dedicated to serving his country at the age of 25, lost his life. And it makes a lot of people look at our situation and wonder, almost 18 years into this fight now, why we're still there. What do you say to them?
Yeah, look, it's tragic. It's sad. It's awful. But I think what's amazing about all of this is he's 25 years old, and we have young people that today are going to still walk into the Army, the Marine Corps, Air Force, Navy Recruiting Center, still raise their right hand to protect and defend this country, despite the fact this war's been going on a long time. Whether we fight terrorism is not our choice. Where we fight terrorism is. And I would much rather fight the terrorists in Afghanistan, as this brave soldier and these 3 that lost their lives yesterday did, instead of on the streets here in the United States of America. I wear on my wrist, it's a buddy of mine, Captain Andreas O'Keefe. I flew with him in Iraq in 2008, and he was just killed this year in Iraq. And think about that. Mr. O'Keefe has been in Iraq multiple times over a period of 10 years, at least that I knew him, and he gave his life. But, we have a brave group of people that still protect freedom, and I think it's essential that we put the terrorists on their heels in their home area instead of let them come here, because unless we're willing to convert to their brand, their strict, narrow brand of Islam as a country, they will be determined to kill us. And we have the best fighting force in the world that's going to make sure they don't make it here.
I think that is absolutely the reason that this young man was there. He said he wanted to fight for his country and he wanted to help people overseas. And there has been, certainly a lot of gains with regard to that. We've lost a lot of people recently. 13 U.S. service members have now been killed in Afghanistan in 2018. So, in terms of how we're doing, and the president has just spoken out about this in this new Washington Post interview tonight. And he said, this is not a direct quote. I'm piecing some of it together here. He said, experts have told him that we need to stay there. He went on to say in a separate part of that response, oil is now less of a reason. All of a sudden it gets to a point where maybe you don't have to stay, he said, and the exact quote is up on the screen now. But he says one reason, now are we going to stay in that part of the world? One reason is to stay is Israel. And then he went on to say what I just said. Oil's becoming less and less of a reason. So, all of a sudden it gets to a point where you don't have to stay there. What do you say about that?
Well, I want to get to a point where we don't have to stay there. The president was right, especially in the first part, which is we can't leave. And the reason is this. The Taliban have a saying, it's, America has the watches, but we have the time. President Obama, I hate to do whataboutisms, but President Obama, when he claimed that we were going to leave and he put a timeline, he emboldened the Taliban. He emboldened the enemy because these are people that are fighting a generational war. They knew they just had to outlast us. Sending the message and meeting it, which I think the president is doing now, that we are going to win. We don't get defeated on the battlefield against the Taliban or Al-Qaeda or ISIS or anybody. Where we get defeated is in our will. And it's tragic that we've lost 13 people, and it's awful, but we have the best fighting force that's inflicting significant damage on the enemy and not on ourselves. And the other thing to keep in mind is the Afghan people, we are popular in Afghanistan, and they have stood up and have sacrificed to defend their country. There's a lot of work to do, and I think we're going to be there a while. And I wish at the beginning of this war, we'd have spent a little more time setting that table. But if we leave, we will be back because fighting them is not our choice. It's just where we fight them that is.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you for your service there. And to these young men and their families, we are thinking about all of them tonight and the extraordinary sacrifice that they have made to help people overseas, as Landro, as he was known, friends say that he would often talk about. So thank you very much.
God bless those families.
Indiana law that was signed by then Governor Mike Pence. The law required doctors to inform their patients that abortions were not permitted if the reason was the unborn baby's race, color, or potential of disabilities, such as Down syndrome. So earlier this year, a federal appeals court found that law unconstitutional. But that could potentially change under the new Supreme Court with the addition of Justice Kavanaugh. Here now, Governor Mike Huckabee, a Fox News contributor and author of Rare Media. We're done well. Good to see you, sir. Thank you very much for being here. So obviously, this is an issue that is very important to you. Why, do you think that there may be, for a number of reasons, science and a number of reasons, more of these cases that start to question the validity of Roe v. Wade?
Well, let's hope so, because science has dramatically changed since 1973. We know things about the unborn child that we simply didn't know in 1973, about when life begins and the viability, issues that were very different then. But I think a lot of people may need to step back and realize that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, it doesn't end abortion. So many people think that that's the end of abortion. It isn't. All it does is return it back to the decision of the states. Now, in some states, like my home state of Arkansas, abortion would be abolished because there's a constitutional amendment that bans it. That would happen in several states. In other states, there actually could be more abortions. My guess is states like New York and California would likely see an uptick in the number of abortions because those states would likely end any restrictions whatsoever. Ultimately, this is a decision. We've seen incremental changes in the way people approach it legally at the state level. But ultimately, it's got to be decided by personhood. This will be resolved when we determine that an unborn child is a person. That moment is when that child will be protected by the 5th and 14th Amendments. It says that you can't deprive somebody of life or liberty without due process. And in an abortion, there is no due process.
So when you look at this Indiana case, for example, and it was signed under the governor, but then it was overturned, the question was that it's a discrimination issue, right? You can't end a life based on race or color or creed or the potential that that child might have a disease like Down syndrome. And we've done a number of stories of, countries that are cheering their success rate at not having any Down syndrome children in the whole country because they're ending that life the second that they understand that could possibly happen. And we all know, what a gift Down children are to the families that they live in. Yeah. But Roe v. Wade really just it made that the federal decision that really limited the state's ability to make these decisions for themselves and the people to vote and change the laws in their own state.
And Martha, this particular law in Indiana, think about it. When the federal courts overturned that law, what they basically said was we can't discriminate anywhere in our culture, except we can discriminate when it comes to the gender or to the race of an unborn child. I find that appalling. I wish society would find that appalling.
What do you say about, obviously some of the toughest questions that Judge Kavanaugh got were whether, were with regard to this issue of Roe v. Wade. And he, like everyone who sits in that chair, said, I can't tell you that until I see the case before me and I look at the law that with regard to it. But, I would imagine that people who feel the way you do, are hopeful that this court will make this decision.
I would love to see it happen. I just want people who are pro-life to recognize this is not the ultimate solution. This does not really fix the idea of what I think has been a horror on our civilization, that we have taken the lives of almost 1 million unborn children a year in their mother's womb. This is amazing. 60 million. If you want to know, well, how come we have to have so many people immigrating into the country just to supply jobs? Well, a lot of it is we've aborted our workforce over the past 45 years. Think about that. 60 million people that would be in our workforce were never seen the light of day. That's pretty tragic, Martha. And I think every time we can put a new hindrance on the wholesale slaughter of unborn children, it's a step for a more civilized culture in society.
Governor, thank you for being here tonight. We will see where this case goes, and we'll keep an eye on it. We'll follow
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, so still ahead this evening, why 2 Trump insiders say the president's worst enemies could still be within the White House walls. David Bossie and Corey Lewis, establishment Republicans who didn't support the president until he won, then showed up looking for a job in the White House. Joining me now, Corey Lewandowski and David Bossie, authors of Trump's Enemies, How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency. Good to see you guys. Welcome back.
Thank you.
To the program. My question about the November 9th Club is, you guys couldn't run the whole place by yourselves. Obviously, there were going to have to be people who said after the election, well, I didn't support him in the beginning, but I do now, and I want to help. What's wrong with that?
And there are a lot of people like that. Let me give you a great example. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was with somebody else in the primary, but when he came to the administration, he was with the president's agenda 100% of the time. But other people, not only did they work against him in the election process. They didn't vote for him on election day. But when they got into the White House, they had their own agenda. Gary Cohn, Sean Spicer, Rob Porter. And that agenda was to subvert the will of the president to move the country in a certain direction. That's not what they were there to do. They were supposed to be there to support the president. And I think of people
What direction were they trying to move the country in?
Well, look, what we saw very clearly was the president wanted to sign a trade deal with South Korea. And the Bob Woodward book says Rob Porter and Gary Cohn took the papers off the Resolute desk because they didn't agree with the president's trade policies. They weren't elected to do that. And I think of people in the past like Jim Baker, who was a rival before he came in to be a chief of staff to a different person. And that's what you're supposed to do. You put your personal differences aside, and the privilege of working in administration means you support the president and his agenda. You can have differences of opinion, and you should air those differences. But when he makes a decision, you don't use your position to subvert the decision that's been made.
Who's still in the White House that fits this category that you think is subversive?
Martha, one of the one perfect example is the author of Anonymous. We don't know who that person is yet, and
who do you think it is?
You know what? I don't know. I think it's easier to figure out who it's not than who it is because there's just so many people that it could simply be. But my point is, there are people there who, like the author, feel that it's their job to save the country from the president, as that person said in the letter. It is outrageous. People, that person's a coward, should stand up and be counted and say, I'm against.
Yeah, why not just say,
and get out.
I actually shouldn't be working here because I don't agree with what you're doing, and I gotta go.
And that's really our point. That's
right.
Only our point. And by the way, all presidents need to grow their administration. All presidents bring people in with different opinions.
Does the president, though, is he good at listening to someone who says, look, I support you, but this is why this is a really bad idea?
He is not only good, he's great at it. He wants people with differing opinions. That's one of the reasons that we think he needs a team who he's going to listen to and then make decisions based on all of the information.
Who should he put in place? You think John Kelly should go?
Look, here's what I think. I think when the president makes decisions to bring people in like John Bolton and Larry Kudlow and Bill Shine, individuals who are there for one reason, which is to support the president. They have fundamental disagreements amongst them, and they present those arguments to the president, and the president makes the final decision on what those policies are going to be. But that's a healthy thing to do. Those are the type of people that I think the president needs to continue to bring in and surround himself with.
So who would you replace John Kelly with, David Bossie?
Well, whether or not John Kelly needs to go or not, look, there's a bunch of people. This president has a lot of people who want to come work for him. That's a fact. So in all sorts of jobs. And I think this president, first and foremost, when he makes his changes post midterm elections, which all presidents do, and we're looking forward to some of these changes, he needs to put together that team that is going to be solely focused on his reelection, seamlessly working the legislative agenda, the political agenda, and the communication aspect of that, the forward-facing 2020 agenda that is going to get this president reelected. That should be what people are thinking about when they're creating the new team.
All right, I want to pull up this tweet by James Woods, because this is something that we've talked about. The First Lady who... she said in that interview that she did in Africa, she said, I'm the most bullied person in the world, and I think, she sort of couched that a little bit, but she does feel like that sometimes. She's really incredible in so many ways, and she is very supportive. She's also a person who says that there are people in the White House who are against her president's agenda. So why do you think that she doesn't get the kind of attention that Michelle Obama got, for example?
It's really respect. It's not just the attention, it's the respect. She deserves the respect that every First Lady gets. She is a First Lady. She's doing an amazing job with kids, going on that trip to Africa, bringing the light to the plight of some of those people over there that she's meeting with. For her to be treated in that way. And by the way, James Woods, that tweet, I'm so glad that he did it. I follow him. He is an amazing guy. He makes people think about things every day. And even House Beautiful. Did you know House Beautiful was a really political magazine? Because I didn't. They went after her.
Here's the interesting part. You remember about 2 weeks ago, her office said there was a person in the White House who didn't deserve the privilege of working there, and the mainstream media said, oh, my God, the First Lady's being involved in personnel decisions. What do you think the role of Hillary Clinton was when she was the First Lady? Do you think she
out with the travel office, for one thing?
Right, and she took over the health care for the country and all these other things. And Melania Trump was chastised for making a statement for people who shouldn't be working in the White House. The mainstream media attacked her for that. It was disgusting. They never would have done that to Barack Obama's wife. They never would have done it to Bill Clinton's wife. They sure didn't do it to George Bush's wife. There's a double standard, and it's unfair.
They should give her a chance.
Absolutely.
Give her a chance.
She's the rock of that family.
And you know what? We can all agree on one thing. The White House is just beautiful Christmas time, and she did a lovely job with it. So I think that should be. Thank you, gentlemen. Good to have you here. 2 minutes away, polls will close in Mississippi in the Senate race runoff. That is allowed.
President Creed, for the honor of your support, I need you to get your family, get your friends, get your neighbors, get your coworkers, and get out tomorrow and vote for Cindy Hyde-Smith.
So that was on Monday in Tupelo, Mississippi, as the president campaigned across the state in hopes of increasing his majority in the Senate, backing incumbent Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who faces Democratic challenger Mike Espy from the Bill Clinton administration. That is what's happening in tonight's runoff. Polls close in about 3 minutes from now. And correspondent Peter Ducey is live with an update. He is at Hyde-Smith's headquarters right now. Good evening to you, Peter. Tell us what's going on down there.
Martha, despite all the national attention about how this race could reshape the Senate, state officials are saying that the turnout has been steady but slow. As you just mentioned, Mike Espy is trying to become tonight the first African-American elected to the Senate in this state since Reconstruction. And he says he knows he needs crossover voters because the state's Democratic base and the state's African-American base are not enough to lead him to victory. It's still early, but so far tonight, Democrats in the state are telling me they think the dynamics of this special election might be different enough from the general that they could be poised for an upset, the way that Democrat Doug Jones upset Republican Roy Moore in the Alabama special election last winter. But unlike Alabama's special election, where top Republicans kept the controversial candidate at arm's length, and the closest President Trump got to Alabama during election week was Florida, the GOP cavalry has been here in full force. President Trump twice yesterday, Senators Lindsey Graham and Roger Wicker, the governor Phil Bryant, the RNC chair Ronna McDaniel, all with Cindy Hyde-Smith appealing to voters. And a big part of their argument is just give Mitch McConnell a little bit of cushion so that senators who sometimes take a long time to decide how they want to vote in D.C. lose leverage when it comes time for a close vote on something like immigration or a Supreme Court justice. And so the real wild card tonight is who actually showed up, because you could vote today whether you voted 3 weeks ago or you didn't. Martha?
Yeah, and obviously, you know, what may be helping Mr. Espy a bit is the controversy that has played out there over a couple of comments that Cindy Hyde-Smith made. I know Senator Graham was asked about it today, and you said he was there supporting her. He said he didn't think people should be judged by one comment, but clearly that opened up some possibilities for Espy.
It might have, but again, the state is very, very red. Graham's point was Cindy Hyde-Smith wouldn't be such a proponent of criminal justice reform if she was this big racist that some would have you believe. But again, the Cindy Hyde-Smith team very, very confident in their chances
We'll
to hold the Thad Cochran seat.
We'll see what happens. Thank you very much, Peter. That is our